Welcome back. You're still watching Daybreak on this 4th day of December 2023, and so much is happening as the country, or actually as you come to the end of the year. The major stories on the two dailies, the front page of the Daily Nation is Kenya's debt hole that they are talking about during the tenure of President William Ruto, which is just over 13 months. The country has borrowed, or the debt has grown by 21% from 8.7 trillion shillings to 10.58, and they're warning that the additional loan from IMF and the World Bank, 2 trillion shillings, could easily push the total debt that the country owes to 13 trillion shillings in those 3 years, which is way above the debt anchor, which now is 55% of the GDP. The GDP, according to the Kenya National Bureau of Standards, as at the end of last year was about 13 trillion shillings. Of course, so much may have happened to mean that it is slightly higher, but the figures that we have from KNBS are that. On the front page of the Standard, experts, Kibaki would be shocked at Rutonomics. Economists say President Ruto claims of copying former President Mwai Kibaki's economic playbook seem not to be working, as his policies and interventions point in the opposite direction, leaving Kenyans desperate and hurting. In studio, I have Eden Kenan, who is the Member of Parliament for Eldas constituency in Wajir County. We also have Anthony Oloch, who is the Member of Parliament for Mathare constituency in Nairobi County. We're still expecting the arrival of one John Kagusha, Member of Parliament for Mukurweini constituency in Nyeri County. As soon as he's able to join us, he will be on board of this conversation. And let me be beginning with you on the two dailies, especially on the question of a debt hole and the fact that experts are saying something different from the President Ruto economics. What are your thoughts, Honorable Anthony Oloch, especially when you have to compare the reality of debt? So much has happened at the global scale in that short period. What are your thoughts?
Well, really, there's a lot of expectation that this government would be able to turn what they call a different approach towards the issue of debt. You remember that we moved from the paradigm of debt ceiling to debt anchor. And I can remember one of the key things they said that the cost of living, one of the key things that drove the cost of living was unbridled borrowing that was driven by the former administration. So this government, then the expectation of the public would be that they would bring down foreign debt, but as you have just indicated, it has now gone from 8.7 trillion to now 10.58. This is just for a period of 1 year. So if you take into account that we have 3 or 4 more years of this administration, one wants to wonder whether the change from the debt ceiling to debt anchor has really helped this country. Secondly, the so-called leaning towards the Kibaki sort of economics. How is this helping us when the country is spiraling from one level of debt into the next level of debt? Then you've also seen that we seem to be falling over ourselves to try and please the IMF, World Bank, and all these Bretton Woods institutions. And you would expect that the statistics in terms of our economy has now stabilized vis-a-vis the cost of living, the cost of fuel, and the cost of doing business in Kenya would then reflect. The reality of the ground is that things have not changed.
Honorable Kenan, so what is the impact of politics, especially if you have to look at the presidency of William Ruto? What would you say is the impact on what we feel, or are we suffering something outside the political influence of a leader?
I think going back to the first question, first of all, Kenya is a member of the international community. And by extension, the world now is a global village. So what is happening in Kenya, what is happening in the US, what is happening in Dubai, has an effect on any other part of the world. Now going back to this, the debt, the rise in debt, you can also recall that when Ruto took over, the shilling, $1 was about 110 Kenyan shillings. Today, a dollar is about 156, meaning part of this, the difference, between the debt, what Uhuru left, and where we are right now, might be as a result of the currency fluctuation. So you need to put that, you need to factor that. I mean, as a result of the current fluctuation, because the figure might have remained the same actually if you compete, or might even gone down. But because of the currency fluctuation, you'll realize that because our debt generally has two aspects: external and domestic. External is on generally these other international currencies. Domestic is on Kenya shillings. So if you put both, and taking into account that over the last 1 year, the international economic climate has not been very good. We have the Ukraine war right now, we have the Israeli-Gaza war, and generally the cost of, as he has rightly put it, the fuel prices have been skyrocketing. So all these combined might have a bearing on this. But let me come back to this, where we are. The realities of our economy vis-a-vis our politics actually has not been very good. From the time we got our independence to date, I think generally speaking, the Kenyan society has been reduced to consumers of politics, raw politics, and that is what has actually stagnated every bit of our development agenda. Where were we in 1968? Kenya was a leading donor nation. And where are we today in 2023? Still stagnating and struggling, simply because we have failed to deal with the politics, the hard issues. I think one thing that we must appreciate is that, in leadership, decision making is very expensive. Indecision actually is the worst form of inefficiency. The fact that right now we have a president who is making decisions, hard decisions, and these are things that he has promised, hard decisions that personally I'm persuaded in a year or so will add value to the economic, social, and political well-being of the people of Kenya. Because what Kenyans right now need is an improvement in their per capita income, improvement in the reduction in the cost of living, and an improvement in delivery of government services. All these can just come because our economy was in ICU. I remember when Mzee Kibaki came to power, and we're still in parliament, our GDP was about 187 billion. Within a span of 5 years, our GDP actually shot to 1.7 trillion. What magic did Kibaki do? The magic that he did, he made decisions. He made decisions that conform to our basic needs. He made decisions that added value to the economic realities, not only the Kenyan platform, at the region, at the continental level, and even globally. And these are things that right now we need, so that we need actually to amplify and make sure that Kenya joins the league of developed nations. Look at what has happened in the region. Just make a comparative analysis. Start from Ethiopia. It is projected that the next 1 year or so, the GDP of Ethiopia will be close to twice that of Kenya. Move along. Djibouti, Eritrea, the Sudans, Uganda, Somalia, Tanzania, and then DRC. We have just remained stuck in that mindset that Kenya is a leading economic hub, while not putting in place changes that will catapult us in joining the League of Developing Nations. So the realities right now is, politics aside, I am persuaded, and having been around, having seen the policies of Mzee Moi, having seen the policies of Mzee Kibaki, having seen the policies of Raila Kibaki, having seen the policies of President Uhuru, I am persuaded that the president has made decisions. These decisions will be tough. They will be painful. Let me say this. They'll be painful at the initial stage, but ultimately they are going to pay dividend towards you'll see the results. Maybe end of 2024.
What decisions are you talking about, Mheshimiwa?
The decisions, the tax reforms that nobody wanted to touch, efficiency in our tax. There are certain things that people thought were an abomination actually even to talk about. In the Baltic nations, or even the Nordic nations.
Tell me, Mheshimiwa, just before we go to that, what are those tax reforms that you specifically find very useful for the country?
Take, for example, NSSF. NSSF is a leading service provider.
But that wasn't his decision.
It was his decision because the bill was passed in 2012. Nobody was ready to operationalize.
It was in court.
No, even the court was deliberate. Even the court was, how did the court end? How comes that NSF right now, from the time Ruto took over, when he was taking over, they were collected about 800 to 1.2 billion.
It's not because of him. There had been a court case.
Take this. I've been around. I can even tell you the politics of the case. How did it end? Why did the other president not end? Why was it not in court? How did the court case take over 13 years without even a mention? It just tells you the politics. From 800 to 1.2 billion right now to close to 7 billion a month. Maybe in another 10 years, NSF will be a leading lending nation actually to the taxpayers. That's saving the taxpayers borrowing from the other international agencies. The same is being done with LAPSET. The same is being done with NHIF. The same is being done with LAP Fund and all other quasi-government organizations that have inherent ability to generate funds so that they also become source of funding. It's not that the money is going to be free. If you look at Indonesia, Malaysia, these countries have utilized locally generated funds by agencies like NSSF to fund development agencies. So instead of going to the World Bank or IMF or other international agencies, you borrow locally. That saves the hard-earned foreign exchange reserves. That also saves the pressure on the local currency. These are realities that we must face.
All right, you've spoken about NSSF, but you said tax reforms. I'll come back for the tax reforms because those are not exactly taxes. But Honorable Kagushia from Mukurweini constituency now joins us. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we are talking about the situation the country finds itself in, and there are those two dailies on the front page of the Standard is about that Kibaki would be shocked at Rutonomics and Kenya's debt hole on the Daily Nation. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, especially I had asked the question of what is the impact of politics on what we have, or is it a question that is beyond the control of the country?
Why would Kibaki be shocked? Kibaki would be happy that at last there's someone who thinks the same way he thought. He would be happy that there's someone who is ready and willing to generate his own revenue from within the country and manage the country largely from its own resources rather than from over borrowing. And let me start from here. Number one, what I see here on Daily Nation as 8.7 trillion is not a true representation of the debt that was left in by Uhuru Kenyatta. This 8.7 trillion had so much that was undeclared. For example, the subsidy that was being given for fuel, which was left at 67 billion Kenya shillings, which was not paid, is not in this figure.
Is it tabulated as part of public debt or as pending bills?
I mean, that should be a public debt. It's a subsidy that was given.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah. Is it categorized as pending bills or as public debt?
I mean, when you have a pending bill and when you have a debt, whether it is, I mean, it's all public debt. Are you getting? When you look at the amount of money.
What I'm asking is, yes, I understand it's a debt, but in terms of how it's categorized in government books,
yeah,
does it feature there as part of external and local debt, or does it feature as pending bills which are declared?
This was actually not declared, so to say. It was not declared, and it is one of the debt that is standing. And let me tell you why it is a public debt. When the subsidy was given and not paid, the oil marketers were owed by government. And what has happened is that they demanded the new government to pay them their 67 billion immediately. And what the government did is they did not have the money. So they asked them, can we change this one into kind of a government bond or something that you can earn a bit of interest on it as we prepare how to pay you, as we collect money to pay you. And they agreed, I think, for a period of time. And so that is why I say then that ends up being a debt that was supposed to have been declared. The same thing also to the UNGA subsidies that were also given. And quite another amount of money that was also borrowed from various sectors that was not declared, including some of the guaranteed debts that the government had guaranteed other bodies, other agencies, county governments and such. Quite a number of those debts were actually not declared here. And if you did tabulate, the debt that we're having was coming to almost 9.5 trillion Kenya shillings. And again, as Mheshimiwa has said here, most of this debt, again, was also dollar denominated. And so when the Kenya shilling was devalued and it lost its value, we ended up having an increase of debt that was not necessarily borrowed.
What do you mean the Kenya shilling was devalued?
I mean, when you have had the, Kenya shilling losing the value in the fluctuation of the forex.
Fixation, you mean?
Are you getting? Yeah. So once, I mean, generally, when the shilling.
No, devaluation is deliberate. Depreciation is not. So what happened?
That's okay. Whether you want to call it devaluation or depreciation, whatever you call it, but the Kenya shilling has lost value against dollar. And for that reason, the amount of money that we have borrowed, because we borrow in dollars, has ended up hitting the sky. And it is skyrocketing now, not sometimes because of borrowing, but because of the challenge of the depreciation of the Kenya shilling. So that is another aspect that may have increased our debt. The other issue, of course, is most of the debt that was taken in the previous regime in the last 10 years, quite an amount of this debt is also maturing now. Like when we talk about Eurobond, it's supposed to be paid now, even though it was not taken in this government. And of course, you know how much pressure this Eurobond has put into our nation. And one of the things to do is to ensure that you're able to collect money to sustain government and at the same time collect money to pay some of those loans. And where you can't collect enough to pay those loans, then you also have to see anyone else who can extend a helping hand in terms of another loan to pay the other one. So you have to look for fiscal space so that the country keeps moving. And that is why you find that you have the president sometimes want to take some little money from here to pay here and collect here to pay there as much as we still continue developing the country, because all these things must move together. Remember, the pending bills now, which you're asking, which was left especially for the roads, was going all the way to about 900 billion Kenya shillings that had not been paid. And you have to pay those pending bills, as much as also continue with those projects that were started. So that is an important aspect that we need to look at. And
I've seen some have stalled, including one to your county.
Let me say this. I know you are referring to the issue of the Keno Marua Road, that someone had sent a screenshot of a letter that is saying the work was going to be suspended. You know, when you're in sometimes you have people who are very apprehensive about many things. Sometimes they overread or misread. That is an administrative letter that emanates from a contractor to the government. And those kind of letters are done on a daily basis. I'm telling you, even as we are sitting here today, there's a contractor threatening government today, somewhere, so writing letters.
Is that letter legitimate?
I mean, it's legitimate. And there's nothing wrong about it. It's an administrative letter. It's a reminder. I can tell you...
Is there a problem?
I mean, of course, there has been a challenge of cash flow. That has been a problem. And it's not like that contractor has not been paid today. It's part of the pending bill that has been there. Quite an amount has also been paid to him over the year, but there's still quite an amount that is pending. And that is why the president is working extra hard to ensure that he gets the money. But the contractors do those kind of letters every other day. And that does not mean that he stops working. And one of the jobs that Murkomen as a CS has been doing is to plead with these contractors to continue working, even in the face of threats from them, to continue working, and as the government is looking for funds. And as we are talking today, that road is still on. It is going on. I use that road almost on a daily basis as my road. So the contractor has never left ground, but he is threatening government, because as a contractor, what you do when money is delayed? And the government has also declared we don't have enough and sufficient cash. So that is a letter that should not be alarming to anyone. It was not supposed to go to the public. But of course, when it goes to the public can interpret it as they would like. But these are letters that are done on a daily. If you go to the file of this contractor, you will find more letters like this, not done in this government only, done even in the previous government. In my road, in Mukurweini alone, I have a road that has been going on since 2017, since 2018. I mean, the contractor has actually even in the past...
You speak like that's the norm.
It's the norm.
That's it's supposed to be.
I mean, this government, when government doesn't have sufficient money, contractors threaten government. Even some of the contractors...
That's how things are supposed to run.
I mean, that's not... I mean, if we were in a first world where a government is collecting sufficient money, contractors would come, do the job, and be paid. Why are we talking about pending bills that have not been paid for the last 10 years? So much the pending bills. And some of these people actually go to court, and so there is also the court cost, there is also the penalties. Are you getting? That is not how things are supposed to work. But that is how they work, because as a country, we don't have sufficient cash to clear the pending bills and to clear for them. But there's something I also wanted to say.
No, I'll come back to you.
Let me just point this. This is very important. I want to say this. As far as the issue of debt is concerned, we have come to understand as a country that the debt that is being taken by government affects us and affects our life. And so, one of the demands that we must put forward to government is that we must have a public register of debt that is being collected. We must know who is taking what, where, when, why, at what condition, at what cost, repayment period, and the impact it's going to have in the economy, and how that money is also used. Because you also bear me witness, in the past we have had in cases where money has been borrowed and misused, or money has been borrowed and put in projects that cannot pay back. Because why do we borrow? We borrow so that we can expand the economy. We borrow so that we can do an SGR, which is going to be productive, and that is going to help us collect more revenue. And when the time comes to repay that money, then we are paying from that project that we did. Now, are we able to pay from SGR, the money we collected from Eurobond? The truth of the matter is we are not able to. And so as a country then, we must have a say. As a parliament, as a people, we must have a say of how we borrow, where we borrow, why we borrow, and where we use that money that we borrow. And we must understand the cost. And that's why we are pressing, as a parliament also, we are pressing that we must have this debt register, must be declared public, must be inspected by the relevant committees, must be inspected by the public and by any other person who has an interest in what is happening.
Okay.
And it was a big mistake, for example, to do SGR, which is diesel REN, instead of taking that money and using it to do an electric train that is faster, efficient, and that would have probably had a better economic expansion in our country. And the same thing,
do you even have enough electricity to run the train?
I mean, that is.
There are some parts in this country that have no electricity.
You know, we have also borrowed so much to exploit the geothermal energy that we have in the rift. That, if it is properly exploited and properly channeled, it would help us to be able to run electric trains.
I hear you, and I'll get back to you because you dispute the figures that are supplied by the Central Bank of Kenya.
Absolutely.
Of course, you have explained why. I just want to know how much the current administration has borrowed according to you. But Honorable Oluoch, he says a few things, especially on the implementation of programs and projects, to the extent that he says it is the norm that contractors write letters demanding for payment. Have we normalized, allow me to call it bad manners, to an extent that you can't even tell the difference of what's supposed to be the issue, the status?
Well, I think this government has itself normalized that to the extent that they are not reining in the practices of government in terms of implementation of government projects. So I don't think this government can run away from the practice where contractors are not paid. The issue of pending bills has been something that has not just started now. It started in the Ruto administration. In the first administration, I think we came up with the idea of a pending bills committee or forum where pending bills were supposed to be reduced. I saw in the second administration of Uhuru Kenyatta that they attempted to try and bring some sanity to this. So this government should be explaining to people why we have not moved from the platform that was created. I think there was an intergovernmental, especially at the county level, a platform where pending bills and ensuring that contractors were not downing their tools, blackmailing government, because this contributes to increase in the cost of doing contracts. What you call piling of bills and increasing of the rates of doing contracts is actually eventually passed to the taxpayer. So what has this government done? I think absolutely almost zero. I was listening to my colleague here to try and find out what it is that they have done in terms of the initiative, being the majority in the House, on how we can be able to transit this to ensure that between the time that a contractor enters the site, if the lifespan of that contract of doing a road or a project is 2 years, that we actually do it within 2 years. I was also listening to my colleague here on reduced tax collection, and it's a contradiction in terms for me, because on the one hand we have increased basically every single tax. On the question of fuel, we took it from the 8% petroleum levy and took it to 16%. There is no tax that has gone down. They have actually increased every single tax imaginable. We have also digitized and come up with a single platform on collection of government revenue. So when you look at all these things in their collectivity, why would we have reduced revenue collection instead of increased revenue collection? So I am interested to find out why, because listening also to Governor Njuguna Ndung'u the other day, talking about we have a liquidity problem. Why do we have a liquidity problem when we have increased taxes, supposed to crystallize into increased revenue collection? Why do we have that? We can take it back and blame it on undeclared debts that are maturing now, bad politics and borrowing practices by the former administration. We have said this for 1 year. 1 year down the line, this government should now be saying that our new measures in terms of new ways of running, in terms of new ways of carrying out debt and tax collection mechanisms have now crystallized into a new practice. Instead, we are in a position where we are stagnating. If you look at Kenya National Bureau of Statistics indicators, yeah, there are 3 categories when I looked at it quickly yesterday. The 3 categories that are driving the cost of living, in my view, one of them is increased prices of commodities. This has gone up by 13%. You look at the other areas that are driving the cost of living, transport, housing, water, electricity, gas, fuel, all these have gone up by about 8.5%. You look at non-alcoholic beverages and others, these are things like soda juices and all, have gone up by 16%. So generally, if you look at all these, they account for nearly 57%. So when you're talking about normalizing bad practices, I think this government, not the previous government, has normalized this. And contrary to what we are being told at every single platform, is to go back to the former administration, I think it is time this government owned up. These bad practices and normalization of economic mismanagement falls squarely at the feet of this government and not the previous administration.
I want us to take a short break from here, but Tony Kabak will continue the conversation. Still waiting to hear from Honorable Kainan about the tax reforms that are working, and from Honorable Kagusha about the actual debt or borrowing that has been taken by the current administration. As you continue the conversation, stay tuned.